All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to break down a pretty interesting take on the recent South Australian election. This all comes from a pro-One Nation YouTube video, and their argument is, well, that this wasn't just some minor blip on the radar. No, they're saying it was a huge, seismic shift in Australian politics.
And wow, this quote really just sets the stage, doesn't it? It gets right to the heart of the video's main claim, that this election result has genuinely scared the major established parties. Now, that's a pretty bold statement, so let's unpack how they actually build their case for it.
So, first things first, a huge part of their argument is about reframing the whole outcome. The source is saying, hey, forget what you might be hearing elsewhere. They contend that this was, in their own words, a massive win for One Nation. And this is where the perspective really shifts. See, according to the speaker, the goal wasn't even necessarily to win government, not at all. The whole point was to prove a theory, that all the online support, the social media buzz, that it wasn't just noise. This result for them is the hard evidence, the concrete proof that their base is ready to go, and most importantly, that it translates into actual real-world votes. Okay, so to really get why they see this as such a big win, you've got to understand this one key term the speaker uses over and over again to describe their opposition, the Uni-Party. Right, so what is the Uni-Party? Well, in this worldview, Labor and Liberal, they aren't actually enemies. The speaker sees them as two sides of the same coin, a single political establishment that basically works together to keep things the way they are and to squeeze out any real challenges from so-called outsider parties. And this chart really shows you what they're talking about. According to the numbers they cite in the video, One Nation pulled in almost 22% of the vote. And crucially, that puts them ahead of the Liberal Party. This right here is the whole basis for their claim of being the new second opposition party in the state. For them, it's a direct hit against that Uni-Party structure we just talked about.
So this really breaks down the conflict they're describing. On one side, you have what the source calls a corrupt system. The idea is that preference votes from smaller parties just get funneled over to Labor, which helps keep them in power. But One Nation's path is presented as a totally different thing, a direct challenge where they're winning over voters directly, pulling them away from the established parties.
But this whole thing isn't just about vote percentages on a chart. No, the speaker argues this result turns into real, actual power, specifically legislative power in the state's upper house. 3. That's the magic number here. According to the source, that's how many seats they've secured in the upper house. And in their view, those 3 seats are a total game changer, enough to completely shift the political dynamics in South Australia.
So, you might be asking, how do 3 seats translate into so much power? Well, the argument goes like this. With those seats, they can suddenly become a major roadblock for the government. They believe they can block what they call radical bills, force changes to other laws, and basically act as a voice in Parliament for what the speaker calls common sense.
And this quote from the source really just sums it all up, doesn't it? This new power they have in the upper house, it's framed as the one thing the Uni-Party desperately wanted to prevent. And from their perspective, that just makes the victory feel even better.
Okay, this brings us to the next big theme in this analysis, and it's a classic us versus the world narrative. The idea is that this win didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was achieved against what they describe as a unified, all-out assault from the entire establishment. And you can see here, they paint a picture of being completely under siege. They list off literally every other major party, Liberals, Nationals, Labor, the Greens, and then throwing the major news outlets for good measure. The claim is that all of these groups were just relentlessly attacking One Nation during the whole campaign. And now that the election's over, the argument is that the media has changed its tactics. So instead of attacking, this source claims they're now trying to just play it all down, to make it seem insignificant, arguing that since One Nation didn't actually win government, it means they've got no real momentum. And this brings us right back full circle to that powerful quote from the beginning. It just ties the whole narrative together, right? The media was hoping for a total failure, but instead, One Nation gets what they consider a massive win, which leads right back to that core idea: the establishment is now seriously worried.
So the big question is, where does it go from here? Well, according to this analysis, the SA election isn't the end of the story, not even close. It's framed as just the beginning of a much bigger trend, something the speaker calls the snowball effect. And this timeline really lays out their narrative of how this momentum has been building.
They point to the Bondi Beach event as a moment that really snapped people's minds. Then, the SA election comes along and serves as the proof of concept. So the prediction now is that this success is just going to keep rolling or snowballing into the next elections in other states.
So what's pushing this snowball down the hill? Well, the source points to a whole bunch of national crises. The argument is simple. People are fed up. They're unhappy with the cost of living, housing, immigration, crime, and all that frustration is what's supposedly driving them away from the so-called Uni-Party and towards other options, like one nation.
So, to quickly recap the argument from this source, the South Australian election wasn't just another poll. It was framed as a huge tipping point. It's their proof of concept, their big victory against the establishment, and the very beginning of a national movement. Which leaves us with the one big, provocative question this entire analysis is built around: what happens when the snowball really starts rolling?